Well, good evening, everybody. For those watching this in the evening, obviously. Good morning if you're watching it. Good morning. So, obviously, it's myself and Dino. He has prepared something for this evening again. And so, without any further distraction apart from the football, I'm trying to keep one eye on over there. We're going to hand it over to Dino to commence the chat.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah, I was just going to say if Terry suddenly jumps out his seat, England's just scored. Okay. Right, so tonight, yeah, I can entitle this script as Sorry Seems to Be the Hardest Word, taken from the Elton John song, of course. Yeah, basically, it was about a year ago. I was in Edinburgh and I was having lunch in the Princess Street Gardens, a lovely summer day. And I think I was going to an appointment, so I had an hour or so to spend to myself having lunch. So I walked into the gardens and I found a bench eventually where I could sit down. All the benches were basically filled with people. It was a lovely day, plenty of people about. But there was one bench, there was just a solitary older man sitting on one end of the bench. So I thought, this is fine, I'll sit here. And I think he was having his lunch as well, just sitting there quietly. So I sat down, opened up my sandwiches, my drink, and I'm at one end and he's at the other end of the bench, just looking at the gardens, had my lunch, 20 minutes or so. And I thought to myself, right, I'll go up onto Princess Street itself and I'll see if there's a cart there, see if I can speak to someone. So I toddles off up onto the Princess Street, and right enough, there's a cart, and there was two sisters there. So I approached them and started speaking to them. And after just a minute or so, one of the sisters sort of moves away, and
That's
and this
surprise.
man and this man comes in and takes her place. And I looks
Wow.
at him, and he looks at me, and he goes, "Oh, I was just sitting on the bench with you." So it was the same guy,
Uh,
and he says, "Oh, all right." I says, "So you're a witness, yeah?" And then it occurred to me, when we were witnesses, if we'd been in that situation, now he's obviously there
yes,
having his break, they're working on the carts. Um, what an opportunity for informal witnessing for me just sitting
absolutely.
on the bench. Oh, it's a lovely day. What do you think? I wish it could be
Yes,
peaceful. Love this. I
yeah,
even thought, what the
absolutely.
Bible, perfect opportunity.
Yeah,
He said nothing,
yeah,
you know. And I thought about it. And I think he was a wee bit embarrassed because I think he must have realised it was a perfect opportunity for an informal witness, which he didn't do. And I thought to myself, yeah, because you don't really want to talk to people, do you? It's much easier to do your sacred service, your ministry, standing at a cart where people are just
yeah.
walking past and just maybe glancing at the cart rather than actually having to speak to someone and give an informal witness. So I thought, we wouldn't have got away with that in our day. We would have been expected
No,
to do some witnessing there.
absolutely.
Anyway, I had the kind of general chat with him, the usual topics, but there was one thing that stuck in my mind about this encounter. I was talking to him about the generations, and I said that what got me was that the society, the organisation, hadn't said, well, look, we're sorry that for all these years we were saying one thing and now we've completely changed it. Um,
Yeah,
and he says, but they have apologised. They did say sorry. And I says, what? When and where did they say sorry?
yeah.
But he was adamant that they had apologised for these failings in the past.
Mm.
So I've never seen or heard an apology for that. So what have they got to apologise for? Well, running through a few things. The generation, they changed the goalposts. There's no two ways about it.
Mhm.
Um, and as we spoke about last week, they're not doing a separating work any longer. Separating work that we were doing in our day. And it's that chap in Glasgow you spoke to, Adrian had no, Madeline, sorry.
Madeline, yeah.
He said, "Don't we don't judge people. But at the same token, you don't appear to be doing a separating work either. So that's all changed. Um, then I thought about what about the blood fractions that came in long after when we stopped attending meetings. There must have been thousands who died over the years through refusing blood transfusions, where
Yeah.
maybe their lives might have been saved if they had been able to take blood fractions, which they're now
Yeah.
allowed to take. I'm not aware that there was any apology over that. You know,
Mm.
I hate to think what some witness families might be thinking if they've lost a loved one that might have been able to take blood fractions, but
Yeah.
didn't. And it came back to mind another thing. Around about the 1980s, 85 or something, at a district convention in Edinburgh, I went along to, I think it was the year that was this, there was missionaries had been brought in and were attending that convention, and there was a special missionary meeting. So I went along just to have a listen and just to inquire about it. And one of the
Did you
things,
when you were there? Did you do
Mhm.
the missionary position?
Yeah, yes, I, I'll
Oh.
be your straight man. I'll set them up for you. But but
Oh.
one thing that stood out for me in that meeting was they made the point that the missionaries have to get the immune shots, the what do they call them, the vaccinations when they go to
Yeah,
particularly
yeah,
these
yeah,
hot
yeah.
countries, malaria and such like. But they made the point that these vaccines contain blood fractions, right?
Oh,
They're
okay.
made with blood fractions. Now, at that point, that you couldn't take blood fractions. So they made the
Right.
point that if you took a vaccination to go abroad, you were doing it off your own back, right?
Yeah.
The society weren't telling you, and they weren't telling you to take the vaccination. Um, so basically, they were putting it on your own head, you know. But really, if at that point any sort of blood fraction or blood product was not allowed, but they were allowing the missionaries to do it because it suited their purpose, right? So
Mm.
it's like rules for
Yeah,
one, rules that suited the organization, you know.
yeah.
So never heard an apology about that. Um, so dress code, so the beards, the sisters now being able to wear slacks where in the past they couldn't. No tie. You can give a talk from the platform without wearing a tie or a suit jacket these
Mm.
days. Um, And it just made me remember back in there when I used to do a bit of hair cutting for yourself and a few others in the hall. And I remember
That's when I had hair.
when we both had hair. Um, I remember doing
Mm.
Jim's hair one time, and he'd said to me, he had a sort of his hairline was quite prominent at the sides of the temples. It kind of grew quite far in at the temples. And we decided that just to kind of change the look a wee bit, I would not only cut his hair, but I would maybe just shave the line of the temple area for him, just to bring it back a wee bit. So I did
Yeah.
that. He went into the hall, and the presiding overseer pulled him aside and said to him, "Right,"
Mm.
he says, "you can't go on the platform for at least a few weeks until your hair grows back."
Mm.
And that's true. You
Now,
speak to Jim.
yeah, the same thing happened to me actually. I went in and got a haircut, and the same thing happened. I think the guy said to me, I said, I want to get a haircut and don't fall on the road. He says, I want it short. And he says, he described a haircut. I wasn't too sure what it was. And I just nodded my head, goes, yeah, that sounds all right. I literally got hold of the thing, just went like that. And that was it. And I went, oh my God. And of course, once he'd done that, there was no going back then. It was like a reverse Mohican. So, of course, it all went off. Our next thing is there's our presiding overseer, Jimmy Ward, come up to me and said, Terry, and he just said,
Mm.
while you've got the haircut, you won't be doing any responsibilities. There'll be no platform appearances from you. You can still crack on and do your pioneering, but there'll be no platform with you while you've got a really short haircut. So yes, it did happen.
Yeah, yeah, ridiculous now when you think about it. Just the length of your hair or a beard on your face meant you couldn't do these responsibilities. It's not as if you were turning up like a punk with
Yeah,
zips and pins sticking
mm,
out your face, you know. Crazy days. Um, yeah, so as we've seen recently, the change in the higher education position, we know
yeah,
we've spoken about how we knew ones in the congregation, children of elders, prominent,
mm,
very
yeah,
prominent elders, um, whose children went to university and nothing was ever said about it. And their
mm,
position as elders was never questioned, um, although they did do that later on in other
mm,
places. But another big one was 1975. Now, in one of the last week's video, there was one chap, Scott Clark, I think it is, that posted and was speaking about 1975, and he seemed to suggest that there wasn't very much that you could find. And basically, he kind of towed the party line that the organisation put out at the time, that it was the brothers who forged ahead and expected too much from what they
yeah,
had said, and that there was no apology from the governing body for brothers selling their homes or giving up their careers,
yeah,
moving into mobile homes or tents or whatever. And basically didn't take any responsibility and said, "Oh, we never said it was 1975. It was going to happen. Yous have
mm,
look, yous have said, yous have thought more of this than what we were making out." But
yes,
that's not the case. That's not the case at all.
no,
Um, if we do a bit of digging, in the from the late 60s through the early 70s, there's lots of articles and where they've said that young ones at school would never see the end of their education or go to
that's right.
university, um,
Yeah,
don't take up a career because all careers are going to come to an end shortly.
yeah,
But the classic example of this is, again, if we were to go onto Internet Archive, and you can find the book Life Everlasting and the Freedom of the
yes,
Sons of God.
yes,
Now, I've got it on my
yeah,
other screen here, and it's really clear. Pages 31 through to 35. That book gave, and this book was from 1966, I believe, right?
mm,
1966. So it gave a 5-page chronological list starting from the
yes,
creation of mankind,
yeah.
ending in, well, the penultimate year, 1975 on this list.
That's quite right. Right, sorry about that, everybody. That was my fault because unfortunately, because I live in the middle of nowhere, we had a power cut. So Dino was frozen in time, and I was like, going, "What's going on here?" Anyway, hopefully this will be it'll segue nicely once I've combined the two videos together. In the meantime, Harry Kane did in fact score for England, so the timing was excellent. So anyway, we got up to the point where you were looking at this book which started off with the Adam's creation all the way down to 1975. Okay.
That's it. Yeah, so they're clearly saying that 1975 was the end of 6,000 years of man's existence. So, page 29, just prior to the chronology list, it says, according to this trustworthy Bible chronology, 6,000 years from man's creation will end in 1975. And the seventh period of 1,000 years of human history will begin in the fall of 1975 CE. And then if we move to page 30, it says, how appropriate it would be for Jehovah God to make of this coming seventh period of 1,000 years a Sabbath period of rest and release, a great Jubilee Sabbath, for the proclaiming of liberty throughout the earth. And it goes on to say, it would not be by mere chance or accident, but would be according to the loving purpose of Jehovah God, for the reign of Jesus Christ, the Lord of the Sabbath, to run parallel with the seventh millennium of man's
Yes,
existence.
that's right.
So what it's saying is that how appropriate it would be that this last 1,000 years of the
Yes,
seventh creative day, that will be the millennial reign of 1,000 years of Christ, that the two will run
yes,
together.
yeah,
So
yeah,
although they never actually wrote the end of this system is 1975, that book, those paragraphs and that chronological list clearly say that the thousand
yeah,
year reign, they expected it to start in 1975. It's
yes,
clear as anything. And
yeah,
that's why brothers were selling their homes and giving up their jobs
yeah,
and doing all this. Um, it couldn't be any clearer from
mm,
that book. So, but again, did they apologize? No. They just blamed the brothers for running ahead and expecting too much. When an organization says that they're God's channel of communication and they write that, then are you not going to believe it if
yeah,
you believe that they're God's channel, you know? So
yeah. They
no
actually
apology for that.
reiterated that. Um, I think it was the yearbook of 1974, and they actually put in there. It may have come to people's notice that in that book we did this, and it was said again in 74 that it was probably going to happen. I think when the yearbook of 75 came out and it hadn't happened, that's when they said, I think they actually said, I think maybe Jehovah's Witnesses, although they never blamed the hierarchy, they said maybe they jumped the gun a little bit, but it was based on the fact of we were told, and if you think about it today, the social media being what it is, it's really easy now for a rumor to spread globally. Do you know what I mean? So easy. But back then, how would a rumor, how would, 75 Armageddon's coming spread globally with the Jehovah's Witnesses? Because, unless people were discerning that themselves, it wouldn't transfer from, what I mean? It wouldn't go from one congregation to another congregation. It was just that we all read that, and that's what we believed. That's universally the Jehovah's Witnesses all around the globe believe that
Well,
because of those books.
I'll tell you why it was globally, is because Fred Franz, that this was primarily, I believe, Fred Franz's idea, and I think he was still vice president at the time, with Nathan Noah the president. But Franz went round all these various conventions throughout America, and he went to foreign lands as well, and he was basically um, saying this about 1975 at all these assemblies. And in fact,
Yeah,
midweek there, I was watching, I got onto a website and someone had put up a video of a talk. It was the audio of a district convention. It was some well-known brother was giving the talk, and he's basically saying about 1975 and stay alive till
still alive in
75 was the
75.
shift.
Yeah, 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 that's right. Still alive in 75.
So yeah, so it was a case of you're going along to these conventions, and Fred Franz, the vice president, is saying,
Mm,
1975,
yeah,
the thousand year reign is going to start, you know. So they predicted it, they got it wrong, but they wouldn't apologize. They wouldn't say it was their fault, um, because if they said it's their fault, then their position as God's voice, God's channel on earth,
yeah,
looks bad,
yeah,
Um, plus, when you're talking about if that chronology failed, you've then got to ask the questions that we have done in a few videos ago about how they calculate the chronology. They're
mm,
getting it all wrong. They've not calculated the chronology correctly, but they still stick to the 1914 chronology, when
yeah,
this chronology for 75 uh, is all wrong. So they're not reliable when it comes to chronology. So the last couple of things I noted down here was, as we've said before, when they secretly became an NGO to the United Nations, a non-governmental organization. They did a deal with the devil, basically.
Yeah.
And when they get found out by the Guardian newspaper, they tried an excuse that they were just doing that to get a library card access to
Yeah.
United Nations library. While at the same time, they were denying to the congregations that this had even happened.
Yeah.
So they're telling one story to the Guardian newspaper to try and justify themselves, and they're telling the congregations another story, and never again apologise for that. And finally, of course, the big one with the two witness rule. They've stuck to that. In fact, Morris, the one that got removed or left the
Yeah.
governing body, I think one of his last videos that he did was he was basically saying, we're not going to move from the two witness rule. That's a biblical rule, and we're not going to change that. So they're staying steadfast with their idea that they can't report to the police an incident unless they've got two or three witnesses to verify it.
Yeah.
So continue to fail to report crime, criminal activity to the police, thinking that they've got the right to just deal with it themselves. No apologies to all these ones in the congregations that have been abused. So never heard or seen any apology for any of this. So it does seem that sorry seems to be the hardest word for God's organisation, allegedly, alleged organisation.
Yeah.
So just following on from that, and thinking again about the conversation we had with Brother Bouncer in Glasgow at the railway station a few weeks back.
Yeah.
I'd mentioned to him about United Nations, and he denied that had occurred. And
Fine.
also we spoke about the new light. I brought that up because I had watched a couple of times. There's if you go onto jw.org and if you put in the search column, if you put in new light, right, and it'll bring up some articles, but below that it'll bring up some videos you can watch. And one of them is the video of governing body member Geoffrey Winder, and the talk's entitled "How Does the Light Get Brighter?" Okay,
Right.
now I'd got the information that I'd mentioned to Brother Bouncer was taken from this video, and by his responses, it makes me think that he's never seen this video, never watched it. But basically, Brother Winder is giving this talk trying to explain how the organisation makes changes in their thinking. And he made 4 points. He first of all started off by saying that the Spirit has to reveal to God's organisation. Yes. Second point, that the organisation is the faithful and discreet slave of Matthew 24:45. He says that Jehovah reveals things in his own time. And fourthly, the rate at which he reveals is governed by the light getting brighter. And he quotes Proverbs 4:18 again. So as we've mentioned before, Proverbs 4:18 has got nothing to do about divine revelation or the rate at which divine revelation is made. It's talking about righteousness, the path of the righteous one getting brighter. It's not applied to revelation or progressive revelation, but they insist on using that as a scriptural basis for this idea that Jehovah won't reveal everything all at once. But I'll go back a wee bit before I comment further on that. Back to the first point about the Spirit reveals. And he's making the points 1 and 2, the Spirit reveals the faithful and discreet slave. But if you were to turn to Acts chapter 2, which is the account about the Spirit being poured out at Pentecost, Peter, in his speech there, He's quoting from, now I meant to check this up and I forgot. I think it's maybe Hosea or Amos. It's one of the smaller prophets. And he quotes from that prophet saying that the Spirit, Jehovah will pour out his Spirit upon all flesh. I will pour out my Spirit, and your sons and daughters shall prophesy. So Peter wasn't saying that the Spirit had been poured out on this small group of the faithful and discreet slave. He wasn't saying that the Spirit was being poured out on just the 12 apostles or the governing body of that time with James the Just, etc. He was saying it was being poured out on all flesh, and sons and daughters shall prophesy. So the scriptures don't say the Spirit's exclusively given to a select small group. It says that it would be on all Christians. So it is wrong, that they're wrong again, and that Jehovah reveals in his own time. Well, yes, I mean, there is some degree to that. You could say that there is progressive revelation in the Bible. Because, to use the example of light, if you're in a darkened room, you could say, and you're in a darkened room for 5, 10 minutes, and suddenly someone turns on a light, not just an ordinary house light, but a really big, powerful light. For the first few seconds, you would be blinded by that light. It'd be too much. Better to just progressively reveal the light. So I can go with that, and it's a fair enough illustration. But that's not what Proverbs 4:18 is talking about. But just taking that as an illustration. I remember being at school and doing biology, O-level biology, and really loving it. And you would learn things like the simple cell, the structure of the cell, the simple cell as they called it. But then I remember going into higher biology, and they started talking about the complex cell and how it's the nucleus you could break down into parts like mitochondria and explaining what the mitochondria was. So all of a sudden, what seemed very simple was now quite complex, because basically they're not going to give you at school the really complex, deeper things. It's gradually explaining and giving you more and more detail as you can cope with it. So I get that. That's reasonable. And when we look at the scriptures, right from the very first prophecy in Genesis 3:15, where the seed of the woman would crush the head of the serpent, right? That's the first seed. That's the first prophecy.
This prophecy, yeah.
Yeah, and then further on in Genesis chapter 15, we read about Jehovah saying to Abraham that it's your seed, your offspring, that this seed, this prophesied one, would come from. So he's revealed a wee bit more information. It'd be from his descendants. And then 2 Samuel 7 and verse 12 talks about how it's going to be from the tribe of Judah, from David's line, right? So it's giving you more and more information progressively as time went on. Then in Galatians 3, Apostle Paul starts talking about the seed being Jesus. Okay? So it's a progressive revelation, more information as time goes on, which is fair enough. But the point is, at no point in time was there an error in the understanding that had to be corrected. Right?
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
when the witnesses are saying that the light gets brighter and brighter, they're trying to justify wrong teachings. As if Jehovah allows a wrong teaching and then corrects it, and then maybe has to correct it again. That's not progressive revelation. Remember last week we said Russell in the Watchtower, February 1881, it said, a new view of truth can never contradict a former truth. New light never extinguishes older light, but only adds to it. So likewise, my biology class, in higher biology, they were giving me more information, but it wasn't extinguishing the information they gave me before at O level. It was just adding to it. What I learned at O level was still the same. It was still true, but here was something more, you know?
Yeah.
And he then gave an example about Abraham. And I would say it's a very bad example because he was trying to say that Abraham only knew a limited amount, okay, that Christians in Jesus' day didn't know. But when you read John chapter 8, the famous chapter where Jesus says, "Before Abraham, I am," okay, that was a result of a conversation that Jesus was having with the Pharisees, where Jesus actually says that Abraham saw his day, right? And the Pharisees misunderstood him, and they thought that Jesus was saying that he'd been alive in Abraham's day, right? They got it the wrong way around. Jesus was actually saying Abraham saw this day, right? So in Jewish tradition, they actually, I think in the Midrash or the Talmud, they suggest that Abraham may even have had a vision given to him about the future. But the idea is that he knew, he understood from what Jehovah told him that there would come this seed eventually from his descendants, the Messiah, the Anointed One, through which all the nations of the earth would bless themselves. I think you've been burgled. There's a black figure just appeared behind you there. So Abraham did know things of the future. Jesus says he saw my day, right? So it was a bad example to use. But in that video, in 5 minutes and 46, around about 5 minutes 46 in the video, Brother Winder says really one of the most terrible things I've ever heard from the governing body ever say. I think this is really despicable. Talking about these changes that they've had to make over the years, he says, nor is there an apology needed for not getting it right originally.
Yeah.
Right? An apology is not needed. He's saying that, he goes on to say that the governing body are not inspired, they're not infallible, right? So we don't need to apologize. But then again, you've got to ask the question, so if you're not inspired and you're not infallible, why are you beyond criticism? See, we're allowed to criticize anything they say and say to them, well, I think maybe you've got this scripture wrong. Have you ever thought about that? You can't do that, you know? And basically they're saying that when they've got things wrong in the past, it's because Jehovah allowed them to get things wrong in the past, right? And I thought to myself, you're throwing Jehovah under the bus.
Under the bus, yes, absolutely.
You're basically saying it's not our fault. It was the big man's fault. He let us, for 80 years, teach the 20th century was going to see the end. So don't blame us. We're getting it from Jehovah. Blame him. And I thought, that is the most despicable thing I've ever heard from the organization. No apologies needed. It's not our fault. It's not our fault. The fact that they're beyond criticism, as we said, the Spirit is poured out on all Christians, according to the Bible. So any Christian could read the Bible, study, apply God's Spirit, and maybe come to the right conclusion. It's not divinely restricted to the faithful and discreet slave, which is just a parable anyway. It's not, as we saw a few weeks ago, that relates to every Christian who can read the scriptures with the Spirit. But the organization, they act like Putin, the way he does with dissidents. Anybody opposing his point of view, they're basically locked up and sent to Siberia. And what does the organization do? If you criticize their understanding, their teachings, you're frozen out. You're an apostate. You're thrown out and you're sent to disfellowshipping Siberia with no apology. And finally, just one last thought on that. I'd mentioned to that brother bouncer that that the decisions that they make, they've got to be unanimous for them to view it as coming from Jehovah, right? And he says, no, that's not the case. He'd never heard of that. It's there in the video right at the end. He says that basically if they meet as a body, but they're not unanimous, they basically shelve any new light, as it were, any new decisions until such time as they're all unanimous on it. And if they're unanimous, then they say that's coming from Jehovah. So Brother Bouncer needs to look at the video. But it make this last final point. That's what they do now. But Raymond Franz's book, Crisis of Conscience, lays bare the fact that for many, many years, the governing body made simple majority decisions. Right? So if now they're saying that they can only guarantee that Jehovah has decided when they're unanimous, then who was deciding when they were making decisions that weren't unanimous?
Yeah.
You know, it was clearly just decisions of men, and that's why so much change has occurred since Franz and Schroeder and all these other ones died, because basically it was new men came in with new ideas, and they changed the voting. So these older men had domineered the voting for years to get their decisions through. So basically, if they weren't unanimous decisions, then were they really from Jehovah?
Yeah.
So again, clearly, they've got a terrible view of light and who's responsible for new teachings. They're not to blame for any wrong thinking in the past, and therefore they'll never apologize. Because if they did apologize, they would basically be saying that their authority is there's no authority at all, really.
Yeah.
They've got to keep projecting this view that they're in charge and only they can decide. So sorry again does seem to be the hardest word. We just, rather than say sorry, we'll just blame the big man instead.
Yeah, amazing. It's funny that you mentioned that because I bought Crisis of Conscience. I think I got a second-hand version of it. I can't remember where I got it from. Maybe the an early eBay or something like that, or early doors of Amazon. And it was only when I read Crisis of Conscience that all of a sudden everything made sense. Because before that, I'd come to my own decision that this was a lot of nonsense. But it was only based on my own reasoning and understanding. I was just thinking, this can't be the truth. There's too many things changing, and just changing things that were fundamental doctrines are just all of a sudden being muscled out, and nobody's making a fuss about it. I'm going, hold on, what's going on here? And it was only when I read that book and realizing that powerful members of the governing body, or whoever the president was, that it was his agenda that rode through. And that's all it was. And then at that point, all of a sudden, it all made sense, because then I realized, my God, this is a man-made organization. It's dominated by men, and the most influential you were back then would determine the new doctrine of the organization. And at that point, I felt completely justified that I'd made the right choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. So
right. So have you got any more to say? Or is that you?
That's me for tonight. Yeah. Oh, well, just one thing, just to say that I have started another channel called The Faithful Departed, which I'm looking at some doctrines in a bit more depth. Not for everyone, maybe, but if you're interested in looking into some scriptures and some teachings that the witnesses have gotten wrong, I'm going into that in some depth. So it's on a channel called the Faithful Departed. Terry, you might just put up a link if folk want to have a look at it.
I'll put a link in the description, so anybody watching this, if they want to deep dive even deeper, they can click up, they can subscribe to it and put your stuff on there. because we discussed this last time we met, didn't we? That's right, we did. That's
Hmm.
right, when we were in Glasgow. So right, okay. So you already set it up then, yeah? You
Yeah,
set it
I
up.
put up a first video about
All
John,
right, okay.
the prologue to the
Okay, good
Gospel of
stuff.
John. Mhm.
Excellent. Right. Well, I'll have a look at that tomorrow if it's a quiet day. Right. Okay. So we'll if you can send me the link, and then I can include it in the description for the link for this video, and then hopefully you can get people to
Super.
watch you on there. Right. Okay. Good stuff. Right. Yeah. So I think we did. Yeah. By the time we combine the two segments together, it will be around about 35 minutes is what we were heading for anyway. Right, so thank you again, Dino, for your time and your research, and hopefully a lot of people, either if they were around 1975 or subsequently came
Mhm.
a little later and heard rumours about 75. Hopefully, you clarified what was going on back then and why the witnesses these days don't want to talk about it because it's completely embarrassing. So anyway, it's time for you to say goodbye, Dino.
Yeah, goodbye. Thanks for listening again. All the best.
Okay,
Thanks, Terry.
goodbye, everybody. Not to worry. Remember, everybody, if you like and subscribe, it usually raises this up so more people get to watch it. I think we've had about 30 new subscribers since you started joining me with this, so thank you for that. The money will be rolling in shortly. It won't actually because these are not monetized. We're doing this for free. Anyway, right. Anyway.
Ticket to
Right. See you
heaven.
later, everybody. Okay. Bye
Bye.
bye.